I still remember that bright September afternoon in 1991 like it was yesterday, even though it's been more than 3 decades since Emily disappeared. She was just 15 then, a girl full of life and laughter, with her mop of sun-bleached hair and her favorite blue denim jacket that smelled faintly of lavender. It was one of those rare days when the whole town seemed to hold its breath in quiet anticipation of autumn, the air crisp and sweet with the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Emily had decided to take her bike out along the lakeside path, the one that wound like a secret ribbon through the dense maples and birches, where the water shimmered under the sun, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves and the occasional bird call. She loved that path. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could think and dream and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist for a little while. That day, she packed a small bag with a sandwich and a notebook, telling her mother she'd be back before dinner, as she always did, flashing that familiar smile that could warm even the coldest heart. The sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the gravel beneath her wheels as she pedaled away, her bike bell ringing softly with each turn. I can still picture the way her eyes sparkled with excitement and freedom, the careless joy of youth pressing against the edges of responsibility. But as the afternoon wore on and shadows began to lengthen, Emily never returned home. Her mother called her friends, the neighbors, the local police, but there was no sign of her anywhere. No one saw her leave the path, no one heard a cry or a scream, and her bike was never found. The town buzzed with whispered theories and half-believed rumors, each one more painful than the last. People wondered if she had run away, if she had fallen into the lake, if she had been taken. But nothing ever added up. The police searched the woods, the water, the abandoned cabins around the lake, but no trace of Emily emerged. Years passed, and the vibrant girl who had been so full of promise became a ghost in our memories, a wound that refused to heal. Her bedroom remained untouched, a shrine of innocence frozen in time, with her bike helmet hanging on the hook by the door and a small silver bell she loved sitting on the windowsill, catching the light as if waiting for her return. I was just a child when Emily disappeared, but her story became part of the fabric of my life, woven into every corner of this town. We all felt the weight of her absence, the silence where her laughter should have been. That last ride, her freedom ringing out across the water, ended in a silence so loud it still echoes through these streets and into our hearts. As I stand now by the lakeside, decades later, the air still carries the scent of that September day, and I wonder if somewhere, somehow, Emily is still out there, waiting to come home. That night, the memory of Emily's bike bell ringing softly drifts in and out of my mind, like a fragile melody that refuses to fade completely, yet disappears too quickly to hold on to. Neighbors later told me they had heard that faint, haunting chime echoing down the quiet, tree-lined street near the lake just as dusk settled, a sound so ordinary, yet filled with an unexplainable urgency, as if Emily was calling out to someone or something unseen, only for it to vanish suddenly into a heavy, suffocating silence that swallowed the town's usual evening chorus. We all remember gathering in the days that followed, the small town pulled together in a desperate, trembling hope that she would be found. Search parties formed with lanterns and flashlights piercing the dark underbrush, people calling her name through the stillness that stretched unnervingly long. The water was dragged carefully with nets and poles, but nothing surfaced except the occasional debris caught in the reeds, none of it hers. Volunteers combed the wooded trails and abandoned cottages, their faces tight with determination and exhaustion, yet no clue emerged to guide us toward answers. The police catalogued each lead, however thin, interviewing friends, family, anyone who might have seen her last moments or heard something that could break the silence. But the threads always unraveled, leading only to dead ends and deeper shadows. The more the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the heavier the silence grew, pressing on our hearts with a cold weight that no amount of searching could lift. At school, her empty seat was a constant reminder of the unknown, her absence stretching across desks and hallways like a ghostly presence that no one dared to name aloud. Stories swirled, whispers of strangers seen lurking near the path, tales of a flickering light by the lake at night, even rumors of a hidden cave where no one dared to venture. But these only fed the growing void, a desperate need to explain what was unexplainable. As the years piled up, the case slipped slowly from the front pages, its sharp edges softened by time, though the ache never dulled for those who loved her. The town changed, new faces moved in and old ones left, but the memory of Emily lingered, woven into the fabric of our lives like an unfinished song. Her bike, the very symbol of her last freedom, remained missing, the bell that once rang with youthful laughter reduced to a haunting silence that echoed through empty streets and cold rooms. Some nights, I would lie awake listening for that faint, elusive chime, hoping it might break the darkness, a sign that she was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. But as the seasons changed, and more birthdays passed without her, the hope became a fragile thread, easily snapped by the harsh winds of reality. Yet even now, long after the searchlights have dimmed and the crowds have dispersed, that silent bell rings in the hearts of those who refuse to forget, a poignant reminder of a girl who vanished without a trace, leaving behind questions as deep and cold as the lake itself. By 2014, 23 years had passed since Emily disappeared that September afternoon, and the town around the lake had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Yet for me, the world seemed frozen in that moment of loss, like a photograph left out in the rain, colors fading but the image stubbornly persistent. I was there, standing by the water's edge, as I had been every year since the day she vanished, clutching the worn locket she had given me for Mother's Day, my fingers tracing the delicate engraving as the cool breeze tugged at my sleeves. The townspeople had moved on, their memories softened by time and replaced by newer stories and faces, but I could still see Emily's bright smile in every sunset that painted the lake gold, in every ripple that danced across the surface, whispering secrets I longed to understand. Each year, on her birthday, I made the pilgrimage to that familiar spot beneath the ancient oak where we had shared countless picnics and laughter, where the scent of pine needles and damp earth mingled with the faint ghostly echo of her bike bell that once rang clear through the quiet mornings. The flowers I brought were simple, wild daisies and lavender tied with a fraying ribbon, but they carried the weight of a mother's unyielding love, a quiet ritual that held the pieces of my heart together when the rest of the world had seemingly forgotten. Sometimes, I would sit for hours by the shore, watching the water mirror the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, that might tell me she was still near, that the long years had not stolen her away completely. Friends and neighbors offered words of comfort, their voices gentle, yet tinged with the resigned acceptance that she was gone, lost to the lake and the shadows beyond. Some suggested I move on, to find peace in letting go, but how does a mother let go of a daughter who never truly left? The ache in my chest was a constant companion, a reminder that hope and grief are sometimes indistinguishable, twined together like the vines that climbed the weathered fences of our old neighborhood. I kept every photograph, every scribbled note, every fragment of her brief life that I could find, like sacred relics in a world that seemed bent on forgetting. The years brought wrinkles and silver strands to my hair, softened the sharp edges of sorrow, but never dulled the vividness of her presence in my mind. Occasionally, strangers would stop me by the roadside, sharing stories of a girl matching Emily's description seen far from here, flickers of hope that would flare and then fade like distant stars swallowed by the dawn. And so, I waited, season after season, clinging to the belief that one day the lake would give up its secrets and bring Emily home. The town had moved on, life had pressed forward with its relentless rhythm, but for me, time was measured in the years of waiting, in the silent prayers whispered beneath the rustling leaves, in the hope that never truly dies. As I gazed across the shimmering water that reflected the soft glow of the setting sun, I promised myself that I would come back again next year, and the year after that, until the lake spoke and the silence was broken. In the early spring of 2024, the town was shaken awake by news that seemed almost too surreal to believe. Yet it spread like wildfire through the quiet streets and weathered porches where the memory of Emily had long lingered in hushed whispers and aching silence. A local fisherman, casting his nets in the misty dawn over the still waters of the lake, had pulled up something heavy, something unexpected, tangled deep beneath the murky surface. A relic from the past that refused to stay buried. When the authorities were called, the whole town held its breath, watching as divers descended into the cold, dark depths with practiced precision and careful reverence, the water swallowing their shapes as they searched for answers that had eluded us for over 3 decades. What they brought to the surface was both haunting and heartbreaking. An old bicycle, its frame rusted and worn by years of submersion, but somehow still intact, a time capsule frozen in water and memory. Most striking of all was the small silver bell attached to the handlebars, dulled with age yet still able to ring, a faint trembling chime that echoed across the dock and sent a shiver through everyone gathered. For a moment, it was as if Emily herself was calling out to us, breaking through the silence that had held the town captive for so long. The discovery ignited a storm of emotions, hope, disbelief, grief, and a desperate yearning for closure, as the news spread from the lakeside to every corner of our community. People who had long buried their pain found it resurfacing in a tidal wave of memories, faces, and lost possibilities. The police quickly secured the scene, treating the bicycle not just as evidence, but as a symbol of a story that demanded to be told, a puzzle piece that might finally unlock the secrets that had haunted us all these years. For me, the sight of that rusted bike, with its bell still capable of ringing, was a visceral reminder of the girl who had ridden it so many years ago, her laughter and dreams suspended in that fragile sound. It was as if time had folded over itself, bringing a part of Emily back from the depths, refusing to let her be forgotten any longer. The community gathered to watch as the bike was carefully examined, every scratch and dent studied for clues, every detail considered with the weight of decades behind it. Journalists and curious onlookers mingled with old friends and family members, all drawn together by this poignant echo from the past. The lake, once a place of beauty and escape, had held a secret so profound and painful that it seemed to pulse with the unspoken grief of a mother's heart and a town's collective sorrow. As the bell was gently tapped and its clear, haunting ring resonated through the chilly morning air, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope, a quiet understanding that while this discovery could not erase the years of waiting and wondering, it might be the first step toward unraveling the mystery that had silenced us for far too long. The lake had kept its secret until now, but the bell's last ring had awakened a new chapter, and I was ready to follow its sound wherever it might lead. The day I was summoned to the police station to identify the bicycle was one I had imagined and dreaded in equal measure for years. A cruel mixture of hope and fear twisting in my chest like a relentless storm. When I first saw that rusted frame, the familiar shape, despite the corrosion and time, a flood of memories crashed over me. The way Emily had pedaled down the lakeside path, the carefree ring of her bell mingling with birdsong, the laughter that now seemed so distant and fragile. Sitting in the sterile room, the bike resting on a stand before me, I traced my fingers lightly over the handlebars, the cold metal biting through my gloves, and felt the weight of all the years pressing down, each one a silent witness to the pain and unanswered questions. The officers and detectives spoke quietly around me, their voices filled with a new urgency born of advances in forensic science that promised to shed light where once there had been only shadows. It was strange how the simplest object, a bicycle, could reopen wounds that time had tried so hard to heal, stirring the grief that had settled deep inside like a sleeping storm, ready to awaken. I remembered the endless nights of waiting, the candlelit vigils, the whispered prayers by the lake, and the relentless search that had yielded nothing but silence. Now, with this piece of Emily brought back from the depths, that silence was broken, replaced by the clatter of renewed investigation and the cold scrutiny of science. The police carefully dusted the bike for any trace evidence, running tests that were impossible in 1991, their machines humming and screens flickering with promises of answers. They talked about DNA, fibers and microscopic particles trapped beneath rust and grime, all potential clues to unraveling the mystery that had haunted me for so long. But beneath the technical talk was the raw human emotion that none of their tools could measure. The hope that this discovery meant a step closer to truth, and the dread that what we found might be something no one was prepared to face. I found myself torn between wanting to cling to the possibility of closure and fearing that the truth might shatter whatever fragile peace I had managed to build over the years. Each time I touched the bike, I could almost hear Emily's voice, a faint echo carried on the breeze, urging me to keep going, to not give up. The detective in charge promised me they would leave no stone unturned, that this time we would find the answers that had slipped through our fingers before. As I left the station that day, clutching the photograph of Emily that I carried with me always, I felt the heavy weight of the past mingling with a tentative flicker of hope. The town seemed quieter somehow, as if holding its breath alongside me, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Though the years had weathered us all, this moment sparked a new beginning, a chance to confront the shadows and seek justice for a girl who had vanished without a trace, but never disappeared from our hearts. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with painful revelations and uncertain outcomes. But for the first time in a long time, I dared to believe that the lake's secret might finally be revealed. As the investigation reopened, I found myself drawn back into a world I had tried so hard to leave behind. The stale smell of the police archives, and the weight of yellowed files transporting me back to 1991 when Emily was still here, her laughter filling the halls and her future unwritten. The detectives pored over every scrap of evidence, re-interviewing witnesses who had long since moved on, or buried their memories beneath layers of time, and I was there, sitting in cold rooms where the walls seemed to close in, listening to familiar voices strained with age and regret, each retelling peeling back layers of the past that I had never fully understood. The small inconsistencies began to emerge, like shadows shifting beneath the surface of a still pond. Who was the last person to see Emily before she disappeared? Was it really a friend from school, as we had been told? Or someone else? And why did some accounts mention that she seemed distracted, almost uneasy, as if something unseen weighed on her mind that day? Questions that had been whispered quietly for years suddenly became urgent, demanding answers that no one seemed ready to give. Among the testimonies were fleeting mentions of a shadowy figure seen near the lake that afternoon, someone unfamiliar, lurking just beyond the edge of the trees, a presence that had escaped notice amid the chaos of the initial search. I felt a chill when I heard these descriptions, a mixture of fear and hope. Fear for what that stranger might have meant for my daughter, and hope that this new lead could finally illuminate the darkness that had swallowed her whole. The detectives cross-checked names and addresses, searching for any connection between this figure and the community. But the trail was thin and fragmented, like threads unraveling from an old tapestry. I was haunted by memories I had long tried to suppress, quiet conversations, glances exchanged in school corridors, moments when Emily had seemed restless, yearning for something beyond our small town. Was there something I missed? Had I overlooked the signs that might have saved her? These questions gnawed at me as I watched the investigators work tirelessly, their determination unwavering even as the years weighed heavily on their shoulders. The files revealed more than just facts. They exposed the fragile human stories behind the headlines, the hopes and fears of a community grappling with loss. Old photographs, diary entries, and letters surfaced, painting a fuller picture of Emily's world, a world filled with both innocence and the subtle complexities of growing up. As the detectives connected these pieces, I began to see Emily anew, not just as the missing girl frozen in time, but as a young woman with dreams and struggles, caught in a moment that would change everything. The echoes from the past grew louder with each revelation, reverberating through the present and stirring a determination in me to face whatever truths lay ahead. It was clear that this case was more than a simple disappearance. It was a story tangled with secrets and shadows, a puzzle waiting patiently for its final piece. And I was ready to find it, no matter how deep I had to dig. The day I met with the retired officer, a man whose weathered face and tired eyes spoke of decades spent chasing shadows and unanswered questions, I felt a flicker of cautious hope as he began to share a piece of the puzzle that had long been kept from us, a lead buried deep in the past and overlooked by the early investigations. His voice was steady, but laced with regret as he recounted the details of a man seen lurking near the bike path on the day Emily disappeared, a figure who moved with a nervous energy that set him apart from the familiar faces of our small town. This man, whose name had been whispered quietly in the corridors of the police station but never formally recorded, had drawn the attention of a few officers at the time. Yet the case had taken a different direction, leaving this shadowy presence unexplored. I listened intently as the officer described the man's appearance, a tall, slender figure with sharp features and eyes that seemed to dart anxiously, someone who did not belong to the close-knit community and who vanished without a trace shortly after that day. The retired detective's confession was both a revelation and a frustration, highlighting the gaps in the investigation that had allowed vital clues to slip through the cracks. He admitted that bureaucratic pressure, limited resources, and the passage of time had all contributed to this critical oversight. I could see the weight of those years pressing on him, the burden of knowing that something so close to the truth had been ignored. As we talked, I felt the stirrings of anger and sorrow mingle inside me, a mother's fury at the mistakes that may have cost her daughter's safety, and the aching sadness of dreams deferred by neglect and oversight. The officer handed me a faded photograph from his old files, a blurry image of the man near the lake's edge, his posture tense, his hands clenched as if hiding something. The photo was grainy, but the man's presence was undeniable, a ghost from a past that refused to stay buried. I asked about any attempts to find him, but the answer was disheartening. His name was never confirmed. No address or family ties, no fingerprints or records that could lead to him. He had disappeared like a ripple, vanishing into the lake's dark waters, leaving behind only questions. That moment crystallized the truth of how fragile justice can be when hindered by human error and circumstance. I left the meeting with the photo clutched tightly in my hand, the image burned into my mind, a haunting reminder of the path not taken. It felt as if this missing link might hold the key to unlocking the silence that had stretched across our lives for so long. The town was filled with whispers now, rumors reignited by this revelation, neighbors exchanging theories and old fears, resurfacing like the stubborn weeds along forgotten trails. Yet amidst the uncertainty, I found a renewed resolve stirring within me. If this man was the missing piece, I vowed to find him, to drag his secrets into the light and finally honor Emily's memory by uncovering the truth. It was clear that the road ahead would be difficult and uncertain. But I would not rest until every shadow was chased away and every hidden corner explored, for the sake of a daughter lost but never forgotten. The moment the forensic team began their meticulous examination of the bike, a rusted relic that had lingered in the depths of the lake for more than 3 decades, I felt a mixture of apprehension and cautious hope settle over me like a thin veil, unsure whether this painstaking process would finally unravel the tangled threads of Emily's disappearance or simply stir up memories best left buried. The scientists worked with quiet determination, their gloved hands brushing away layers of dirt and corrosion as they searched for any fragment of evidence that might tell a story long silenced by time. It was then that they uncovered something unexpected, small traces of fabric clinging stubbornly beneath the bike seat, fibers that did not match anything we had known from Emily's belongings or clothing. Alongside these were faint strands of DNA, fragments so minute yet so potent that they promised to breathe new life into the investigation. The discovery felt like a heartbeat in the stillness, a subtle yet powerful indication that the bike had borne witness to more than just a solitary ride on a sunlit afternoon. As the laboratory technicians processed these unseen clues, the possibility emerged of a new suspect, someone who until now had remained off the radar, connected through threads of evidence that spanned beyond our town's borders. The detective assigned to the cold case brought forth this startling revelation, that the DNA and fabric traces matched materials found at the scene of a nearby unsolved crime, one that had haunted the region with its own whispers of violence and mystery. This connection sent ripples of shock and urgency through me, the realization that Emily's story was intertwined with shadows far larger and darker than I had imagined. It was as if the lake itself held secrets, buried not just beneath its surface, but within a web of lives and events that converged in tragic ways. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, a mixture of relief that the truth might finally edge closer and fear of what that truth might unveil. In those quiet hours, as the evidence was catalogued and analyzed, I thought of Emily, her bright eyes and hopeful smile, and wondered how many pieces of her life had been hidden away, waiting to be uncovered. The fabric, the DNA, the shadows of a crime long forgotten. They all spoke to a story that demanded to be told, a story of connection and consequence that no one could have predicted. I knew then that the road ahead would be fraught with difficult truths and painful revelations, but it was a path we had to walk for Emily, for justice, and for the fragile hope of closure. The forensic findings breathed new energy into a case that had felt frozen in time, awakening a community once dulled by loss and uncertainty. As investigators followed these new leads, I stood at the edge of the lake, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it a fragile promise that beneath the silence and stillness, the truth was finally stirring, ready to emerge from the depths and bring light to the long, dark night we had endured. While the investigators chased the faint trail woven from DNA and fabric, I found myself drawn into a different kind of discovery, one that stirred the quiet corners of Emily's past that I had never dared explore fully. Going through her old belongings that had been stored away for years felt like stepping into a time capsule, filled with whispers and echoes of a life abruptly paused, the scent of faded paper and worn leather envelopes carrying stories waiting patiently to be told. Among the carefully preserved boxes, I unearthed letters tied with a brittle ribbon, their edges yellowed, but the words inside still vivid with youthful emotion, revealing friendships and confidences that had been kept just out of reach. Reading Emily's handwriting was like hearing her voice across the years, a mixture of hope, fear, and longing that had once filled her days. It was in these fragile letters that I found hints of a secret she had never shared with me, a relationship shadowed by confusion and unease, a bond with someone whose presence had brought both comfort and turmoil. The photographs tucked away alongside the letters showed moments frozen in smiles and laughter, Yet behind the joyful faces lay a tension that only hindsight could expose. There were snapshots of Emily with a boy whose eyes seemed to hold stories of their own, a complexity of affection tangled with shadows no 15-year-old should bear alone. I remembered the subtle changes in Emily during those last months, the quiet moments when she seemed distant, her laughter a little more forced, her eyes searching for something beyond the surface of our small town. Those hidden parts of her life, carefully concealed behind polite smiles and teenage bravado, now unfolded before me in delicate detail, and with them came a deep ache, a mixture of regret and understanding that I had never fully grasped. The letters spoke of fears and hopes, of dreams tangled with doubts, and of a longing for freedom that might have pulled her toward unknown paths. It was as if Emily had been trying to shield me from the full weight of her struggles, protecting her mother from a pain she could not yet explain. As I pieced together these fragments of her secret world, I felt both closer to her and more painfully aware of the walls she had built around herself. The discovery raised questions I was only beginning to ask. Who was this person who had touched Emily's life so profoundly, and what role had they played in the days before she disappeared? The past suddenly seemed less like a distant memory and more like a living presence, urging me to uncover truths long hidden beneath layers of silence and time. With every letter I read and every photo I held, the puzzle of Emily's life became richer and more complex, revealing a young woman caught between innocence and the harsh realities she faced. I knew that understanding these family secrets was crucial, not only to honoring Emily's memory, but also to unraveling the mystery that had stolen her from us. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I vowed to follow these hidden clues wherever they might lead, determined to bring light to the shadows that had lingered far too long. The phone call came late one evening, when the house was quiet and the shadows stretched long across the walls, and even though years had passed and hope had often felt like a fragile ember flickering in the dark, that moment shattered the silence with a weight I wasn't sure I was ready to bear. The voice on the other end was hesitant, low, and filled with the tremors of a conscience long burdened by secrets, someone who claimed to have been a silent witness to the tragedy that had stolen Emily away all those years ago, but had been too frightened or unsure to speak until now. As I listened to the trembling confession, images and memories surged forward, mixing with the raw emotion that had never truly left me, each word carrying the weight of a truth long concealed, a story tangled in fear, regret, and the heavy cost of silence. The caller described the day with haunting detail, a figure near the lake, watching from the shadows, seeing things that no one else did, moments of confusion and fear that turned to horror as Emily's last ride took a sinister turn. They spoke of a moment frozen in time, where choice and chance collided, and the decision to stay silent had etched itself into the years that followed. I could hear the pain in their voice, the burden of carrying this secret alone, and the relief that finally admitting it brought, even as it reopened wounds that the town had tried desperately to close. This confession was a beacon cutting through the fog of doubt and despair, shining light on corners that had remained dark and cold for decades. The police took the call seriously, promising to protect the caller's identity while investigating the claims with renewed vigor. I felt a strange mixture of gratitude and apprehension, grateful for the courage it took to come forward and fearful of what the truth might reveal. The stranger's words offered a glimmer of hope, but also demanded a reckoning with the past, a confrontation with the uncomfortable and painful realities that had been avoided for too long. That night, as I sat alone by the window, the moon casting a pale glow over the lake's still waters, I realized that the journey toward justice was entering a new and uncertain phase. The silence that had hung over us was breaking, replaced by the stirring of voices long suppressed. The confession promised answers, but also forced us to face the shadows we had lived beside for so many years. I thought of Emily, her laughter, her dreams, the bike bell that once rang so clearly, and I knew that this was her moment, the chance for her story to be heard and finally understood. It was a fragile thread of hope, but one I would grasp with all my strength, determined to see it through to the end, no matter how painful the truth might be. For the first time in a long time, the weight of silence felt lighter, and the path toward closure appeared just within reach. When the police finally traced the anonymous call to a small, weathered house on the edge of town, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation swirling inside me, like a storm barely contained, knowing that this reclusive man held pieces of a puzzle that had tormented me for so long. His presence was as much a part of the landscape as the towering pines and winding roads, a figure shrouded in silence and suspicion, and now he was stepping forward, burdened by decades of fear and regret that had kept him locked away from the truth. Sitting across from him in the dimly lit room, I studied the lines etched deep into his face, the weariness in his eyes that seemed to carry the weight of all the secrets he had guarded. And I listened carefully as he began to unravel the story he had hidden for so many years, revealing a chilling scenario that was both hauntingly familiar and unbearably painful. He spoke of an accident by the lake, a moment when fate and fear collided, and instead of rescue or reckoning, a desperate cover-up took hold, sealing lips and bending truths to protect fragile reputations and avoid the ruin that truth might bring. His voice trembled as he admitted the silence had been born not from cruelty, but from terror. Terror of what the consequences would be, of how the town would fracture, and how his own life might unravel if he dared to speak. The partial truths he shared painted a picture far darker than I had imagined, of a community caught between loyalty and denial, and a young girl caught in the middle, silenced not only by circumstance, but by the collective fear that followed. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I realized how close I had come to losing the full story, how the shadows of fear had kept us all prisoners to a silence that stretched for too long. The man's words wove a tapestry of pain and regret, but also a fragile hope that by finally telling what he knew, even if only in part, he might begin to set things right. As I listened, memories long buried rose to the surface. The subtle warnings I had missed, the quiet glances exchanged, and the invisible walls that had closed in around Emily before she disappeared. This confrontation with the past was raw and unsettling, shaking the foundations of everything I thought I knew, but it was also necessary, a painful step toward healing and justice. The room felt heavy with unspoken emotions as the man finished his account, leaving us with more questions than answers, but also with a key that might unlock the door to truth. I felt a deep resolve settle in my heart, a determination to follow this lead no matter where it led, to confront the shadows and bring light to the darkness that had swallowed my daughter. Though the path ahead seemed daunting and fraught with pain, I knew this was the moment when the past could no longer be ignored, and that through this reckoning, we might finally find the closure we had all yearned for. The quiet man's confession was a fragile thread connecting the years of loss to a future where truth might finally prevail, and I was ready to walk that path with every ounce of strength I possessed. The days after the confession were heavy with a tension that seemed to settle over our small town like a thick fog, wrapping every conversation, every glance and every quiet street in a weight of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. The truth that had been buried beneath years of silence and half-truths was finally surfacing, and the community struggled to reconcile the friendly faces and familiar places with the dark realities that had been hidden in plain sight. I felt the eyes of neighbors and old friends on me as I prepared to confront the man who had held the key to our heartbreak for so long. A man whose silence had stretched across decades like a shadow that refused to lift, and whose actions had shaped the course of our lives without us even realizing it. Standing face to face with him was like confronting the darkest corners of my own grief, a raw and aching moment where anger, sorrow, and a desperate need for answers collided in a turbulent storm within my chest. I looked into his eyes, searching for the humanity that had been buried beneath the fear and denial, hoping to find some flicker of remorse or understanding. And I demanded the truth that had been denied to me for so many years. His voice was quiet, but steady as he began to speak, revealing the tangled web of choices and mistakes that had led to that tragic day. The accident that no one dared admit, and the cover-up that had protected him while destroying the innocence of a girl we all loved. The pain in his words was undeniable, but it was mixed with a fear that still clung to him, a fear of the consequences, of the judgment, and of facing the full weight of what had been done. As the truth unfolded, I felt a bitter mixture of relief and heartbreak wash over me, knowing that while justice might finally be within reach, the wounds of the past could never be fully healed. The community, too, was shaken to its core. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, friendships strained under the weight of betrayal, and the town's idyllic facade cracked, revealing the scars beneath. Some sought to turn away, unwilling to face the darkness that had lived among us, while others gathered in quiet solidarity, determined to stand with those who had been silenced for too long. For me, this confrontation was more than a demand for answers. It was a reclamation of my daughter's story and a vow to carry her memory with honesty and strength. I wanted the world to know what had happened, to honor Emily by speaking the truth aloud, no matter how painful or difficult it might be. As I left the house that day, the sky was heavy with clouds, a fitting mirror to the storm that raged within me, but also a reminder that, after the darkest nights, the dawn would come. The truth beneath the surface had been uncovered, and though the journey toward healing would be long and uncertain, I was ready to walk it, armed with the knowledge that silence had finally been broken, and justice could begin to take root in the soil of our shattered lives. The day they found Emily's remains near the lake's edge was one I had both dreaded and hoped for. A moment when the unbearable weight of uncertainty was finally lifted, replaced by a profound and aching reality that left no room for doubt, but opened the door to a long-awaited closure. Standing there, by the quiet water where her last bike ride had begun, I felt the rawness of grief renewed, but also a strange comfort in knowing that she was no longer lost to the silence of the unknown. The earth beneath our feet held the truth we had sought for so long, the fragile remains telling a story of a life cut short, of a girl who had been a part of us and yet so distant for so many years. As the forensic team worked carefully, the community gathered around, a silent congregation united by shared sorrow and the bittersweet relief of an ending that was also a beginning. I clutched a worn photograph of Emily, the image of her smiling face, a stark contrast to the cold, still water that had held her secrets for decades, and I whispered her name into the breeze, feeling the weight of every year without her. Plans for a memorial soon took shape, a place where families could come to remember and honor the children we had lost, where laughter could be replaced by healing and hope, and the echoes of the past could be transformed into a legacy of love and remembrance. The memorial would be more than stone and flowers. It would be a testament to the resilience of a community and the enduring bonds of family, a space where the pain of loss was acknowledged and the promise of remembrance was made real. As I walked along the lake's shore, watching the sun dip low and cast golden light across the water, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a gentle reminder that while the past could never be undone, the future could still hold moments of grace. The discovery of Emily's remains was a turning point, not just for me but for all who had loved her, a moment when grief could finally take a new shape, softer and more bearable, carried by the strength of memory and the comfort of knowing. I thought of the long years of waiting, of the unanswered questions and the silent prayers, and I knew that though the road ahead would still be difficult, we had taken a step toward healing. The memorial would stand as a beacon for all who had been touched by this tragedy, a place where stories could be shared, tears shed, and lives celebrated. In the quiet that followed the discovery, I found myself whispering a promise to Emily, a promise to keep her memory alive, to fight for justice, and to never let the silence reclaim her story. As the lake reflected the fading light, I felt her presence in the gentle breeze and the rustling leaves, a reminder that though she was gone from this world, she would forever be part of ours. Closure at last was not an end, but a new beginning, a chance to carry her spirit forward with love and courage, and to find peace in the knowledge that she was finally home. As I stood among the crowd gathered by the lake for Emily's memorial, a profound sense of peace washed over me like the gentle ripples that lapped at the shoreline, a soothing balm after years of aching uncertainty and relentless grief that had defined so much of my life. Organizing this gathering had been both a challenge and a healing journey, a way to transform the pain that once threatened to consume me into something meaningful and enduring. The town had come together in a way I hadn't seen since those early days of frantic searches and whispered fears. Neighbors and strangers alike united by a shared commitment to remember Emily and to protect the children who still played beneath these trees and along these paths. The memorial itself was simple but beautiful, a circle of stones engraved with names, wildflowers blooming in the soft earth, and a bench where visitors could sit and reflect, surrounded by the serene beauty of the lake that had both taken and given so much. As I watched the faces around me, I saw tears and smiles intertwined, a tapestry of emotions that spoke to the complexity of healing and the strength of community. Children ran and laughed nearby, their innocence a precious reminder of the future we all hope to safeguard, while parents and elders stood in quiet reflection, their hands linked in solidarity and their hearts open to the shared journey of mourning and hope. I found myself speaking with others who had carried their own burdens of loss, stories flowing freely as we exchanged memories of Emily and the other children who had vanished, honoring their lives and the impact they had on all of us. There was an unspoken understanding that while grief was a part of our story, it did not have to define us. Through remembrance and action, we could create a legacy of love and vigilance that would protect the generations to come. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the water, I felt a shift within me, a softening of the edges of sorrow, and the emergence of a quiet strength born from connection and purpose. Helping to organize this memorial had given me a sense of agency in a situation that once felt powerless and overwhelming. It was a way to reclaim hope from the depths of despair and to build a foundation for healing that extended beyond myself. I thought of Emily's spirit, woven into the fabric of this community, a light that could never be extinguished. The day's events reaffirmed my belief that even in the darkest moments, we could find ways to come together, to support one another, and to nurture the seeds of resilience and compassion. As the gathering came to a close and the last words of remembrance were spoken, I stood by the water's edge, feeling the gentle breeze and the steady heartbeat of the lake beneath the surface. In that moment, I knew that while the scars of the past would always remain, we had begun a new chapter, one marked by healing, unity, and a shared commitment to protect the children who are the promise of tomorrow. The healing waters of this lake had witnessed our sorrow and now bore witness to our resolve, and I felt a quiet hope bloom within me that in time, peace would grow and spread throughout this town we all called home. The morning I returned to the lake with Emily's bike bell cradled gently in my hand, I felt the weight of all the years of waiting, grief and hope converge into a single moment of quiet resolve, knowing that this small, tarnished bell, once a vibrant symbol of her youth and freedom, was now the vessel of a mother's love and remembrance that refused to fade away. The air was crisp and still, the soft rustle of leaves mingling with the distant call of birds, as I walked slowly toward the water's edge where the sun cast shimmering patterns across the surface, reflecting the deep blue of the sky and the fragile light of new beginnings. Holding the bell close to my heart, I remembered the countless times its cheerful ring had echoed through our lives, a sound that once marked carefree afternoons and innocent joy, but had become a haunting refrain that carried the weight of loss and unanswered questions. As I stepped into the cool water, the gentle lapping around my ankles seemed to echo the rhythm of my own heartbeat, steady and determined, as if the lake itself was welcoming this final gesture of love and farewell. Raising the bell, I let it slip from my fingers into the water, its descent slow and deliberate, a final ring resonating through the crisp morning air, a delicate, haunting chime that rippled across the lake's surface, stirring the silence and carrying with it a message of remembrance and hope. That last ring was not just a sound, but a promise, a testament to a mother's unwavering devotion and the enduring spirit of a girl whose presence could never be erased. As the bell sank beneath the gentle waves, I felt a bittersweet mixture of sorrow and peace settle within me, a release from the weight of uncertainty, and a quiet affirmation that Emily's memory would live on in the hearts of all who loved her. Standing there, watching the water swallow the bell, I understood that while the past could never be undone and the pain of loss would always linger, this act of letting go was also a powerful step forward, a way to honor the life that was, to embrace the healing that must come, and to carry her spirit with me as I moved into the days ahead. The lake, once a place of mystery and sorrow, had become a sacred space where love and memory intertwined, where the echoes of the past met the promise of the future. I whispered a final goodbye to the bell and to Emily, knowing that her story was now part of the water, the wind, and the land that had witnessed her journey. And as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the shimmering waves, I felt a deep and lasting peace, a quiet certainty that love transcends time, that hope endures beyond loss, and that a mother's heart never truly lets go. The bell's last ring was not an end, but a beginning, a circle completed and a light carried forward in the silence that remains, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child.